August 1940. The country was gripped by invasion anxiety, and a weapons demonstration was arranged for Winston Churchill. The device presented looked as if a medieval siege contraption had been cobbled together with a drain pipe. It weighed well over 360 pounds and had no conventional barrel. Instead, a stout steel rod jutted upwards from a heavy base, and a large bomb, nearly the size of a football, was poised to be slipped over it. Everyone in the room understood Britain's predicament. After Dunkirk, the island possessed only 167 anti-tank guns. German armor could conceivably sweep ashore with almost nothing to stop it, and this crude-looking launcher was being offered as an answer. The regular military had rejected it on several occasions. The Ordnance Board wanted no part of it. Yet Churchill's immediate circle pressed the idea through. The Prime Minister overruled the doubters and ordered rapid production. Within 2 years, more than 22,000 of these devices were manufactured and positioned around Britain. The essential question was whether any of them could actually stop a German tank. The truth is more nuanced than a simple yes or no. The real story of the Blacker Bombard is less about tank-killing efficiency and more about the unexpected offspring it produced, two later weapons that genuinely influenced the conflict. To see why Britain resorted to something as unrefined as the Blacker Bombard, you must first grasp the scale of the Dunkirk catastrophe. From May 26th to June 4th, 1940, the British Expeditionary Force evacuated France. The miracle was that lives were saved. The disaster was that materiel was abandoned en masse. Some 840 anti-tank pieces were left behind, on beaches and in fields, including 509 two-pounders, which represented roughly 60% of the Army's anti-tank capability. Thousands of field guns, hundreds of heavy artillery pieces, around 700 tanks, about half the British total, 11,000 machine guns, 6,400 anti-tank rifles, and more than 76,000 tons of ammunition were forfeited. When the final tabulation was made, Britain had kit enough for only about 2 divisions. 2 divisions against a Wehrmacht that had crushed France in weeks. The arithmetic simply didn't add up. The on-the-ground picture was worse still. The remaining 167 anti-tank guns were thinly spread across the country, often with scant ammunition and too few trained crews. Machine tools and industrial capacity were already tied to aircraft production. Replacements were months away. If Hitler launched Operation Sea Lion that autumn, British infantry would have to face massed armor with almost nothing capable of stopping it. The Boy's anti-tank rifle could penetrate maybe 20 millimeters of steel, but only at extremely short ranges. German tanks already carried 30 to 50 millimeters of frontal protection, and later versions would grow thicker still. The gap between available weapons and enemy armor was widening. In summer 1940, invasion looked plausible. Assault barges were being readied on the continent. The Luftwaffe bombed British airfields almost daily. Nearly 1.5 million men had volunteered for the Home Guard to man roads, beaches, and villages. Many volunteers were unarmed or equipped with broom handles and improvised pikes. Against panzers, these improvised measures were barely symbolic. The armed forces needed a stopgap anti-tank solution that could be manufactured immediately, cheaply, in vast numbers, and without precision machine tooling. Equipment that was tied up in aircraft and engine production. It needed to be simple enough for hastily trained civilian crews to employ. It had to be ready now, not in 6 months. Enter Lieutenant Colonel Latham Valentine Stuart Blacker. Blacker was not a conventional ordnance designer. Born in 1887, he served in the Indian Army and saw action in Afghanistan, Turkestan, and Russia. Earned a pilot's license in 1911 and acted as chief observer on the pioneering Mount Everest flight in 1933. Retiring as a major in 1932, he then privately bankrolled experiments into weapons concepts the Army had spurned. His idea was the Spigot Mortar. A conventional mortar fires a projectile down a barrel. Blacker inverted the principle. A fixed steel rod, the spigot, projected upward from the base. The bomb itself was hollow at the tail. It slid down over the spigot until it seated on the firing mechanism. When initiated, a firing pin running down the spigot struck a primer in the projectile, igniting a measured propellant charge, in some versions cordite, which expelled the bomb. The virtue of the arrangement was manufacturing simplicity. Barrels, with their expensive precision boring and rifling, were no longer required. The rod was plain steel, easy to produce in modest workshops. The bombs could be built to many diameters and scaled to need. Production could be distributed across facilities not occupied with aircraft or tank work. For decades, the idea had been derided. The Ordnance Board had dismissed spigot mortars as early as 1910. Blacker's patent and proposals across the 1920s and 1930s had met with indifference or ridicule. In 1939, and again when Major Millis Jeffress presented it to War Office Research, snide remarks carried the day. One senior board member is said to have declared that even if God himself had proposed a spigot mortar, the board would turn it down. Their objections were not without basis. Spigot systems lacked rifling, and so their accuracy depended on mount stability and consistent propellant charges. Trajectories were high and arcing, which made hitting moving targets problematic. And many professional artillery officers considered the whole concept amateurish. Then Dunkirk happened, and unconventional solutions suddenly looked attractive. Blacker was introduced to MD-1, the secret research unit nicknamed Churchill's Toy Shop, that had been set up to pursue irregular weapons, sabotage devices, and unconventional ordnance outside normal military procurement. Major Jeffress of MD-1 saw potential and took Blacker to Coates Castle to build a prototype. On August 18, 1940, Churchill himself attended a demonstration. Advisors objected, officials objected. Churchill overruled them, and the weapon was fast-tracked into production. The confusing 29mm designation refers to the steel spigot rod's diameter rather than the projectile. The actual bomb was far larger, roughly 6 inches, about 152 millimeters across. The launcher fired a substantial anti-tank projectile. The launcher frame alone weighed some 112 pounds, and with its cruciform concrete or steel mounting, total emplacement weight rose to between 360 and 407 pounds. Moving the apparatus required 5 or 6 men with tools and ammunition. The anti-tank bomb weighed about 19.5 pounds and carried roughly 8.75 pounds of Nobel No. 808 explosive in a hollow charge, shaped charge configuration. The theoretical maximum range reached about 450 yards, but effective employment was limited. Here, the practical problems multiplied. Effective engagement distances were only in the 75 to 100 yard band, and muzzle velocity was low, roughly 245 feet per second, about 75 meters per second. By comparison, a boy's rifle drove its projectile at some 2,450 to 2,900 feet per second. Even a county-level fast bowler delivering a cricket ball at roughly 90 miles per hour sends it at around 130 FTS. The Bombard's projectile was only marginally faster than that. Shaped charges themselves do not rely on impact speed to form a penetrative jet. The jet is a product of detonation and liner geometry, but the Bombard encountered other issues: insensitive and inconsistent fuses, variable standoff and impact angles from its lobed ballistic arc, and an early generation shaped charge whose liner and form were not as efficient as later designs. Ian Hogg and other weapons historians judged that while the Bombard could damage a tank, track damage, optics, and external fittings, it was unlikely to reliably penetrate modern armor. Now, before examining how these realities affected frontline crews, a quick contextual aside. Later in the war, more compact and reliable infantry anti-tank weapons emerged. The German Panzerfaust was a cheap, disposable one-man rocket that could deliver up to 200 millimeters of penetration at short range. The American M1 bazooka provided 89 to 102 millimeters of penetration and was light and mobile.
In 1940, those options were not available to Britain. What it had to field was a 5-man, roughly 180 kilograms with emplacement launcher that needed a fixed mounting and delivered little guaranteed armor defeat. Nonetheless, production went ahead. In September 1941, the first batch of 1,430 weapons was issued to Southern Command. Orders rose to 16,000 and then 28,000, though Home Guard inventory peaked at around 17,954 bombards by September 1942. Ammunition manufacture reached roughly 1.4 million anti-tank rounds and approximately 729,000 anti-personnel rounds. Planned allocations show intended deployment density: 24 bombards per anti-tank regiment, 12 per aerodrome defense unit, 8 per brigade, and 2 per Home Guard company. Royal Engineers precast concrete pedestals and emplacements across likely invasion corridors in southern England. Thousands of fixed pens and mounts were installed. Many of those pendants still exist today as concrete relics by country lanes and canal bridges. A Defense of Britain survey recorded 351 examples surviving in the late 1990s.
Contemporary users were skeptical. Lieutenant Colonel Herbert of the 3rd Battalion Wiltshire Home Guard wrote in November 1941 that the weapon's utility seemed limited to moving targets at under 75 to 100 yards, which he called charming for a unit who would have to load under full enemy observation. He reported that 50 bombards had been issued, but that they were essentially scrap iron. HQ Salisbury Plain District formally recorded the weapon as unpopular. Some units tried to trade their bombards for Thompson's submachine guns, preferring close-in firepower to a dubious anti-tank capability. RAF personnel were explicitly forbidden from handling it, a prohibition that suggests command-level lack of confidence. By November 1941, concerns were widespread. Southern Command issues declined by mid-1942 as priorities shifted. The bombard enjoyed 8 months of frontline favor at best. It saw little meaningful anti-tank employment. In the Western Desert, it was used sparingly in an anti-personnel role because its weight and bulk made it impractical for mobile warfare. Confirmed tank kills attributable to the bombard are elusive. Early trials at Bisley in April 1941 produced optimistic hit probabilities. Under ideal conditions, an aimer might place rounds within a useful window, with a 50 to 60% hit chance at 100 yards, but even a successful hit did not equal a guaranteed kill. Fuses could fail to function, and rounds might pass through unarmored debris without detonating. When bombs did detonate, fragmentation and scouring affected sometimes threw shards back toward the crew. There were training accidents. One verified death occurred when Sergeant Arthur Hanlon of the Tewkesbury Home Guard was killed during indoor practice on November 19, 1942. Oral histories record frequent misfires and mechanical anxieties. The popular comedy view of the Home Guard as a trough of elderly eccentrics, the Dad's Army stereotype, misrepresents reality. The mean Home Guard age was roughly 35. 40% had served in the First World War. These were experienced men facing a real invasion threat with inadequate kit. Historian S.P. Mackenzie argues that the bombard's principal function was psychological and political. It provided visible government commitment and supplied an apparent anti-tank capability where none had existed. Public relations, as much as military effect, counted. And here is where the narrative takes an ironic turn. The Blacker Bombard failed to deliver a reliable anti-tank solution, yet its technological lineage produced genuine battlefield successes. After the Bombard, Blacker developed a smaller infantry variant called the Baby Bombard. It failed trials in June 1941 due to weak casing and spigot. But Major Millis Jeffress at MD-1 dismantled that prototype, reworked the mechanism, and combined it with improved shaped charge warhead design. The result entered production in August 1942 as the PIAT, Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. Weighing about 15 kilograms, compared with the Bombard's 50-plus kilograms, the Piat offered 75 to 100 millimeters of penetration, enough to defeat Panzer III and IV side armor at combat ranges. The Piat was awkward to cock. Operators braced the weapon and hauled on a powerful spring with their whole body, but it functioned. At Arnhem, in Normandy, and in the hedgerows and ruined towns of northwest Europe, British infantry fielded a man-portable weapon capable of killing tanks. 6 Victoria Crosses were awarded for Piat actions. Production reached roughly 115,000 units in total.
The Spigot principle also found a maritime application. The Hedgehog anti-submarine projector launched multiple contact-fused Spigot bombs ahead of a destroyer in a spreading pattern. Unlike depth charges, which detonated at preset depths and allowed submarines to take evasive action in the meantime, Hedgehog bombs exploded only on contact. This allowed attacking ships to maintain sonar contact and adjust an approach until a hit was achieved. The Hedgehog proved dramatically more effective than conventional depth charge tactics. Post-war analysis suggested order-of-magnitude improvements in kill rates, and USS England's sinkings, 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days, highlighted the system's potential. The Atlantic anti-submarine campaign, the contest Churchill described as the only thing that truly frightened him, was decisively aided by such innovations. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker later received a substantial award from the Royal Commission on Awards to Inventors, around £75,000, a sum roughly equivalent to £1 million today, in recognition of his contributions across the Bombard, Piat, Hedgehog, and the Petard Spigot Mortar mounted on Churchill ARV tanks used on D-Day. Could the Blacker Bombard reliably destroy a German tank? Occasionally, yes. A direct hit could damage tracks, break road wheels, smash periscopes and vision slits, and could cause concussive injuries to crews. Mobility kills were possible. But reliably penetrating a Panzer III or IV's armor was unlikely with the early shaped charge round. Frontline crews and their commanders understood this. Soldiers preferred other weapons when they could get them. Units exchanged Bombards for Thompsons when they could. Yet the Bombard's real legacy is that its idiosyncratic, spigot-based thinking led to tools that did work, the Piat and the Hedgehog. The influence of MD-1, the willingness to pursue ideas the orthodox establishment had dismissed, paid dividends. Concrete pedestals for Bombards still dot the countryside. They mark places where Home Guard units, average age mid-30s, and many veterans of the Great War stood ready with a device they knew was imperfect. The invasion never occurred. The Bombards were never fired in anger on British soil. Many were withdrawn and scrapped after the Home Guard stood down in December 1944. But the technological thread, born out of desperation, survived and shaped battlefield outcomes. Infantry at Arnhem and in Normandy used the Piat. Destroyers hunting U-boats used the Hedgehog. A primitive catapult that could not reliably slay tanks indirectly fostered weapons that could and did. That is a prime example of British engineering under pressure. Not every concept succeeds, but failure can point the way to subsequent effective innovation.